Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Keith Moore, and I'm CEO of KDM and Associates and founder of Open Government TV and co-producer of the Innovation in Agriculture and Energy Summit. We are so delighted to have you once again before us and to know what you're going to learn today. On October 19th, 2020, KDM team launched the first ever Innovation in Agriculture and Energy Opportunity Zone Summit. We committed to you then that this would be a 5-year journey. We committed that we were definitely going to evaluate what worked in opportunity zones. We were going to ensure that our audiences would understand the empowering abilities to participate in opportunities with opportunity zone language, legislation. And so today, I am so proud to have a panel of experts nationally recognized, including the original Senator's Office representation of sharing with you this morning about what works for HBCUs located in opportunity zones. We call this a What Works webinar that will be going on for the next year, twice a month, along with our podcasts. We are fully committed. And thank you so much for joining us this morning. And I would like to, it is indeed my pleasure to introduce your host for this morning, MC, nationally recognized David Morgan. David Morgan is a managing partner of D. Morgan and Partners, a government relations and business affairs firm, and the center is a political and business development organization that David leads. He's also co-founder of the National Infrastructure Investment Alliance and general counsel to the National Faith Empowerment Coalition. In his capacity, he has hosted Opportunity Zones forums, just like this, across the country to connect investment and development industry leaders with faith-based and other local stakeholders spearheaded by Capitol Hill, with faith and community leaders from across the country. David's previously served for almost 2 years as Vice President, Government Affairs for 10 years, for American Express. In that role, he managed the government and public affairs portfolios for the American Express open business and the tax and human resource functions, and also served as treasurer for the American Express Company's Political Action Committee. Most notably, David has a long history in working to leverage tax incentives to spur economic and community development. Prior to joining American Express, David was the president of the New Orleans Partnership, where he spearheaded statewide initiatives to utilize the new markets tax credits to spur economic development in distressed communities. A key component of his work was a partnership with the Southern University that leveraged a HUD HBCU grant to fund an effort to align key public, private, and civic stakeholders to facilitate coordinated investments to support affordable home ownership, business expansion, and skilled employment opportunities in New Orleans, particularly following Hurricane Katrina. David received his commendation from the governor, the entire congressional delegation, and the state legislative Black Caucus for these efforts. Prior to that, David served as the tax legislative counsel to a senior member of the House and Ways Committee, where he worked on the new markets tax credits and worked for the Washington, D.C. law firm of Miller and Chavler. David also received his education from Cornell University, from Harvard Law, and without any further ado, and full of experience and expertise, I hand you over to David Morgan, good morning, and thank you for emceeing our august panel, David.
Thank you, Keith, for that introduction. And thank you all for joining us as we kick off this webinar series with a discussion of empowering HBCUs to unleash the promise of the Opportunity Zone incentive. I'm excited to jump in and introduce our Blue Star panel of experts. But first, I want to make clear why we're here and what we're setting out to accomplish. What works for tomorrow today is a call to action for cross-sector collaboration to bring the spirit and intent of the bipartisan Opportunity Zone initiative to fruition. We can all applaud Senator Scott and Booker for their vision of creating a tax incentive that would steer capital to underserved, undervalued, and neglected communities, and to fund high-impact projects that would have strong local participation, spur economic and community development, and directly benefit residents. However, as many of us who've worked in this field have learned from empowerment zones or new markets tax credits, no piece of legislation, no stakeholder group, nor any single sector can solve this seemingly intractable problem on its own. To truly make the senator's vision a reality will require collective action. This webinar series is intended to serve as a trusted platform to develop a consensus-based and actionable strategic plan for that collective action. Our specific aim is to examine the promising strategy of leveraging HBCUs and other minority-serving academic anchor institutions to facilitate public-private partnerships between public, private, and civic stakeholders that seamlessly connect Opportunity Zone capital with high-impact economic and community development projects that are win-win-win for the investors, for the community residents, and for the taxpayers. Each installment of this series will consist of practical, actionable, and consensus-based discussions with policymakers, key stakeholders, and leading experts in the economic and community development ecosystem. The goal being to align on a concrete and strategic action plan. Now, the 5 key themes and in turn topics that we will explore sequentially are uniting around one clear mission, coordinating and collaborating via a central backbone and an aligned strategy, securing adequate and appropriate funding, ensuring accountability and measuring impact, and finally, winning and maintaining support from a broad range of public, private, and social sector stakeholders. With that, I would like to introduce you to our esteemed panel of Opportunity Zone experts and ask them to provide some brief opening remarks to highlight what they're working on related to Opportunity Zone. Our first esteemed panelist is Emily Lavery, Legislative Assistant to Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina. Emily currently serves as Senator Tim Scott's Legislative Assistant for his work on the Senate Committee on Finance and lead policy advisor for Opportunity Zone. Emily advises Senator Scott on broad federal tax policy, including implementation of the 2019 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which Senator Scott was a key architect of, as well as the Opportunity Zone incentive, which was Senator Scott's keystone legislation enacted as part of tax reform, and we're so happy he did that. This is her 5th year serving as on Senator Scott's legislative team. Emily is also 4th year at the Washington College of Law, where she attends part-time as a Juris Merit Scholar. So she's working really hard. Previously, she attended the University of South Carolina for her undergraduate degree, where she was a Sims Merit Scholar. Please join me in welcoming Emily Lavery. Emily, any opening comments?
Yeah, for sure. No, thank you so much, David and Keith, for having me on today. It's always great to see familiar faces. Mary and Robbie are fantastic partners, and it's just great to be on with everyone in the midst of all of this craziness. It's nice to take some time and just focus on Opportunity Zones for a minute. So thank you again. As you mentioned, I serve as Senator Scott's legislative assistant for all of his work on the Senate Finance Committee that is related to tax and trade. So specifically, that means Opportunity Zone implementation all of the time, which keeps us very busy, as you can imagine, especially this year, which has been so crazy. So of course, I think as we start talking about sort of the spirit and intent and how implementation's been going and how that sort of relates to my work, Senator Scott's motivation for drafting and passing opportunity zones is very much so inspired by his own story, which I think most folks are familiar with. But if you're not, Senator Scott grew up without a lot of access to opportunity in a very disadvantaged area of Charleston, South Carolina. And since entering government has made it his top priority to restore and provide access to opportunity for as many Americans as possible. So opportunity zones, again, really, I think encompasses that goal and really homes in on the goals that, again, were motivated by his own path. So opportunity zone implementation certainly is a full-time job. Since passage of opportunity zones, we've been closely monitoring the progress that we've been seeing. Today is actually the 3rd anniversary of passage, which is interesting. And I actually would not have realized that, but for my boss's tweet reminding me. So that's kind of a cool date for the webinar. But just in the, very, very short 3 years that I feel like have gone far faster than I would have imagined. We only had final regulations about a year ago from today. And already we've seen upwards of 75 billion deployed into our low-income communities for the first time in far too long. Opportunity zones, again, as we're looking at the data from 2008 and on, even as the United States was recovering and the economy was taking off again, these low-income communities were absolutely left out of that growth. And again, as we're looking at tax reform as a way to spur and redesign our tax code more broadly, and again, give a new path forward to American competitiveness, it was imperative for Senator Scott that low-income communities were not once again left out of that equation. And as we're talking about bouncing back economically after the COVID-19 pandemic hopefully subsides soon, that's going to be super important all over again. But thankfully, this time we already have opportunity zones on the books. So we're really excited that this tool can hopefully help to ensure a holistic and equitable recovery for all communities. But beyond that, again, we're tracking upwards of 75 billion, and that's just as of 2019, which is super exciting. And again, only having the ink drying on final regulations about a year ago. Of course, timing with the pandemic hitting about 3 months after that has not been ideal, but Senator Scott worked very quickly to get a letter out to Treasury in May, and Treasury and IRS turned around guidance in about 5 weeks to provide immediate relief to taxpayers, entrepreneurs, and community organizations working to utilize opportunity zones. So that was incredible. And this administration has been extremely supportive and helpful in terms of ensuring a very efficient implementation of opportunity zones that, of course, was also optimal. Beyond that, just the diversity of projects that we continue to see is an absolute blessing. Even in the midst of the pandemic, we continue to see groundbreakings and announcements and incredible things coming online. And I'm sure I will drag you all through the details of some of those stories in just a little bit, so I won't go too deep into the weeds with that now. But again, as we're looking into 2021, we'll be looking closely to work in a bipartisan fashion, continuing to reach across the aisle, work closely with Senator Booker, who's been a fantastic partner, and Congressman Kine and Kelly, who are also fantastic. I firmly believe that bipartisan support is only going to continue to grow for opportunity zones. So we will continue to champion that. And hopefully we'll be looking at a fantastic next Congress and next few years ahead.
Thank you so much, Emily. Our next esteemed panelist, Opportunity Zone expert, is Ms. Robbie Jones. Robbie is the president of Kipling Jones and Company, where she's a founder and president, and her investment banking firm focuses on public finance. Robbie's firm has had the opportunity to finance numerous projects on campuses of HBCUs, while simultaneously forging relationships with traditional and alternative investors. Join me in welcoming Robbie Jones. Robbie?
Thank you, David. And I would also like to extend a great deal of appreciation to everyone who's joined this webinar this morning. I know everyone like me is probably suffering from a little bit of Zoom overload, so it says a lot that you've taken the time out to join us. Opportunity zones are extremely important to me for two reasons. Professionally, I'm an investment banker, and I love it. I focus on public finance because it lets me feel like I'm using the capital markets to do some good in the world. So our projects have been infrastructure related, housing, disaster recovery, resilience, and near and dear to my heart, HBCUs. Not to be maudlin, I was literally born on the campus of an HBCU at Tuskegee University, of which I am very, very proud. My parents were professors there. The first HBCU project that I worked on was a student housing transaction in Houston, followed closely by Jackson, Mississippi. And the developers were two young minority males, African-American males in their 20s. They've grown and grown. They now have a merchant banking firm. I am very, very proud of them. They're on the call today. So what I would really like to drive home is there's been a lot of criticism about opportunity zones and how there's a perception that they've been misused, and there's some truth to that. However, when it works very, very well. And what causes it to work well is when there is true collaboration between developers, between investors, and most importantly, with the recipients and residents and other stakeholders located within the zones. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robbie. We look forward to exploring those points in more detail. Let me introduce our third and esteemed panelist, Mary Baker. Mary is the head of the Opportunity Zone practice for K&L Gates, where she co-leads that practice. She worked for almost 3 years on this, so she's been there at its inception, and she's keeping everyone informed. She's been across the country talking about this, and she consults pretty much all the leading stakeholders in the space. She's worked with fund managers, project developers, entrepreneurs, all the Opportunity Zone initiative. Join me in welcoming Mary Baker. Mary?
Oh, thank you, David, and good morning, everyone. Thanks again for joining. And I also want to thank Keith, who has a tremendous vision and for pulling this together. And thank you for allowing me to be part of this. And I also want to particularly thank Emily for joining us today. Emily has just, she works tirelessly on behalf of Opportunity Zones and trying to advance the incentive, and I greatly respect and admire her. So thank you, Emily, for being here today. So I wanted to start by just sort of taking a snapshot of Opportunity Zones. As David had mentioned, I've been working on this pretty much since inception and learning along the way and kind of seeing through the regulatory and guidance process and just everybody kind of feeling their way, because we didn't have a lot of guidance in the beginning. And so I thought it might be helpful to just sort of take a snapshot of where Oz has been and where I think it's going based on my experience working across the board with fund managers and developers and investors and everyone from soup to nuts in the Oz incentive. So when Oz first began, it was more of a real estate play. And there were a number of reasons for that. One, the rules seemed to fit a little more neatly around real estate projects. The guidance that came out initially, real estate was first to the table at Treasury to get guidance out. So the first guidance was sort of focused more on real estate. And the real estate developers were the ones who already had the pipeline of ready capital or knew where to go find capital. They may have had a pipeline of projects, and it was, you know, they could determine to locate them in opportunity zones. So that was kind of what we saw with the first round. And I think it was partly because of that, the opportunity zones has There's awareness on the part of some about whether opportunity zones are really an incentive to benefit wealthy investors or the communities that the projects and businesses are located in. And a hotel is a great thing, right? It creates jobs, it creates construction jobs, it creates jobs for the community, but it's not the what you might think of as the day-to-day normal operating business, the grocery store, the medical clinic, the dry cleaner, the laundromat. All of those things are what I kind of call the quality of life businesses that really improve the quality of life for community residents and create long-term sustained jobs. And at that point in time, I don't think that none of us really fully appreciated, with the possible exception of Emily, the potential of opportunity zones and really what it could do, particularly partnering with the tax exempt community, with the educational community, with the faith community. We just didn't really have a full appreciation of what it could accomplish. But as we saw more guidance come out, more certainty come out with the guidance, then, and people got a little smarter about this and really realized what could be done with the opportunity zone incentive, then we started to see more, and initially Oz was more of a big city coastal thing, like a lot of things are, but we started to see the development, the evolution that more mid-size towns and even rural communities got smarter about, oh, wait, why should all the money go to the big cities on the coast? We can use that money. And they started to realize what types of businesses could be opportunity zones could be used for, that it's definitely a mechanism toward economic justice. You can use it for agriculture, you can use it for energy, you can use it for innovation and startup businesses, not to mention more traditional things like manufacturing and the day-to-day type of businesses that we're used to seeing. In the midst of that, there were still the criticisms. There was also criticisms about the choice of certain census tracts and whether they were the best locations for opportunity zones. And there were criticisms about the lack of transparency and accountability. Were these investments really good impact investments or not? So there was sort of that wariness that was accompanying the evolution of thinking of opportunity zones. But we were starting to get over that hurdle. As Emily mentioned, the final regulations came out about a year ago. There was a lot more certainty for operating businesses, and we really were seeing a real pickup in interest in opportunity zones, particularly on the operating business side and the tax exempt side. Then along came COVID. And along with the economy, the opportunity zone interest in that and projects moving forward, kind of it paused. It didn't come to a screeching halt, but it definitely paused. And just like the economy slowed down, the activity with opportunity zones slowed down as well. There was a lot of uncertainty about projects, whether there was going to be demand for office space or demand for businesses. Local economies were slowing down. Folks' capital gains that they would invest in opportunity funds, they were not, the stock market made a precipitous fall initially, uncertainty about financing and values. So just all of that mix was kind of a perfect storm that everybody just sort of on pause, put everything on pause. In response to that, as Emily mentioned, Senator Scott contacted Treasury, and in response, Treasury extended a lot of the deadlines and thresholds and timelines for opportunity zones, basically kind of like a dream, like from April 1 to December 31st of this year just didn't happen in terms of the timelines, to give people more time to restart their projects and get going on their opportunity zone projects and businesses again. And now that we're a long way from being out of the pandemic, but at least I think there's light at the end of the tunnel, and we're starting to see what I call the Oz spring. We're starting to see more ideas, more projects starting to spring up. And what I really think is interesting, I don't know if it's just a result of the pandemic or the natural evolution of Oz, that we're starting to see much more interest and focus on impact investing and on operating businesses and really building wealth of the residents of the communities where these Oz businesses and projects are being located. So I think that is entirely consistent with the intent of the Opportunity Zone incentive, and I'm very happy to see that. So I'm very encouraged about the future of Opportunity Zones. I think we'll talk later about some of the things that might be done to recalibrate it or to take away some of the concerns about Opportunity Zones. But I'm very encouraged and enthused about it, and I look forward to more comments later about what we can do to move it forward. David?
Thank you, Mary. Now you see why Keith and I are so excited about this panel. I want to encourage everyone listening to record your questions in the chat. I'll try to leave some time at the end to get them in, and we'll figure out how we try to get to as many of them post this event as possible. But I want to jump right in, and Emily, I'd like to start with you. This call to action is really about going towards the spirit and intent of the legislation. I think the senator has articulated it very clearly that he would like this tax incentive to revitalize distressed, neglected community. So I'd love to get your take on how the senator is looking at what he's saying and whether or not he feels like how he feels about whether or not that intent is being realized.
Yeah, of course. So I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head in terms of the original motivations. And I think really it's such an umbrella. When we look at the statute, in its specific language, it's intentionally broad in terms of the flexibility and the types of assets that are able to be held in order to empower communities to move towards goals and create plans that work best for them. Opportunity zones really did empower states and localities to come to the table and use this new tool to level the playing field first and foremost when competing with traditionally wealthier communities, and also decide for themselves exactly how they want to incorporate and rebuild their communities with this new tool on the books. So again, I think some of the immediate outcomes that, are kind of the first ones that we think of is obviously community revitalization, additional access to opportunity, job creation, new resources for communities, and the list kind of goes on. But as we're talking about outcomes, and I think, to your question of how Senator Scott views implementation so far, again, I think it's just been a bit of a whirlwind experience, to see 75 billion in private capital flowing into opportunity zones in just under 2 years is incredible. That kind of uptake is fantastic. And of course, we do not have reporting legislation on the books, so it's difficult for us to have a holistic view of everything that's happening in the marketplace. So we're really grateful to the White House and folks like Nova Gradic who are doing really great work to track some of this so that we can have a small but meaningful window into what's happening. And then the other side of that is the anecdotal evidence. We're very fortunate that we are in a position where folks do often come to us and say, hey, this is what I'm doing in opportunity zones. I want to tell you about it because we're really excited about what we're doing here in our community. Baltimore is a great example. Erie is another really great example. Actually, Senator Scott relaunched his virtual Opportunity Zones tour. If you recall, a few years ago, Senator Scott did a national Opportunity Zones tour where he visited different opportunity zones across the country. He actually relaunched the tour this year. Of course, it's virtual, as with all things in 2020. So if you haven't gotten enough videos in today, I highly suggest this one where he's touring Erie, Pennsylvania, which I believe was the most distressed zip code in the country for years, was experiencing population loss, I think, since the 60s. Opportunity zones are allowing them to complete what should be a 25, 30-year rehabilitation process for their community in 5 to 10 years. And so the ability for this incentive to speed up development has been incredible. But again, as I talk about the diversity of assets, in South Carolina, we just saw the announcement of a $300 million agri-tech campus creating 1,500 jobs in rural Hampton, South Carolina. just a few months ago. And, of course, Senator Scott is a huge champion for HBCUs. So where and when we see projects happening that correlate between HBCUs and opportunity zones, we absolutely love to highlight those. In Jackson, Tennessee, actually where Van Jones is from, oddly enough, ASU's Luminosity Labs is forming a partnership with an HBCU there. I believe it's Lane College. And those students will be working together to convert an old gas station into meeting spaces, spaces for entrepreneurial skills building, spaces for local businesses. In doing so, they'll be creating options, resources, skill building, and job opportunities for the students at Lane College. That again, these are resources and opportunities you would traditionally see at much larger universities, and opportunity zones are making that a reality for the students at Lane College as well. And so that's just a fantastic story, and one that is really near and dear to my heart, and Senator Scott's as well. And so again, it's been really impressive to see when the same incentive is bringing about this for an HBCU in Tennessee, that it's creating 1,500 agricultural jobs in Hampton County, South Carolina, and Galen Robotics in Baltimore, a high-tech startup, moving into a distressed zone. It's really incredible. And I think, we're fortunate to continue to be a bit awestruck about the diversity in terms of impactful investments that we're seeing. And to Mary's point, I think we really are broadening out that definition of impact, where again, job creation in and of itself should be considered a positive community impact. And so again, I think the flexibility of opportunity zones really does home in and allow communities to decide for themselves what it is that their communities and residents need.
Thank you so much, Emily. I want to switch to Treasury and the regulatory regime around opportunity zones, and staying with the question about intent. And Mary, I'd be curious, what's your assessment on how well the regulatory framework and sort of its role in ensuring that the Senator Scott's intent for community development is realized? I know there's been a lot of controversy and criticism, so I'd love to get your assessment.
Well, it turns out that for, 8 pages of legislation, this is just incredibly complex. And so it took a while to get all of the guidance out, and there's just absolutely no way that Treasury, despite their best efforts, could contemplate every situation. So there still remains circumstances where you kind of just have to take the intent of the policy and the circumstances and apply it and do your best. But I do think that Treasury did a good job of putting out regulations and trying to promote the incentive as much as they could within the 4 corners of the statute. I know that there has been a lot of criticism of Treasury and the IRS about lack of information reporting or the limitations on the information reporting that they are requiring. I spent a lot of years at the IRS, so putting on my IRS bureaucrat hat, I can appreciate Treasury's argument that while it would be great to have information about the impact of investments, how many jobs are created, that sort of thing, that is not something that is required for purposes of tax administration and figuring out what needs to be on a tax return. So I think that Treasury's arguments are credible that, hey, we do need a legislative fix to put the transparency and accountability requirements back into the statute, which I will say were in the original legislation that Senator Scott sponsored, but for arcane reasons when the tax reform bill was passed, they had to be taken out. Kind of looking forward, I think Treasury's work is not done. As we talked about, Treasury did issue guidance in mid-year of this year to extend timelines and deadlines for the IAEOZ incentive. When they issued that guidance, I don't think anybody thought we would still be in the place that we are with the pandemic, that we would be coming, they were anticipating we would be coming out of it. I think in talking with clients, they need more time. These projects have been on pause, or clients have invested in projects and then those projects have fallen through. And so then they have to pivot and they have to try to figure out, okay, now what do we do? I think it would be enormously helpful if Treasury could extend some of the original extension that they put out earlier this year, particularly with respect to the 180-day investment period, which really there's not a lot of wiggle room with that in the final regulations. And we have investors that really want to invest in a project, but they're scared to death that the IRS is going to say, well, you're not acting in good faith and you need to pay your capital gains tax. Certainty is the name of the game. No matter whether you are an investor, whether you're a developer, an innovator, a startup company, entrepreneur, you want to know what the rules are. And so the vagaries of the timelines are creating somewhat of a stall. And I think that also there's uncertainty about those projects that have fallen through. Investors are really nervous and project managers are really nervous about how many times can we change our plan and still fit within the OZ rules. So I think it would be very helpful if Treasury could come out with some sort of reassurance that if you're acting in good faith and you have to recalibrate your plans toward another project, that still is within the purview and within the intent of the OZ incentive. Another thing that's creating uncertainty is, again, kind of going to my wariness topic about whether or not certain census tracts may be rescinded, because there's criticism that some of them, really were already starting to gentrify because it's based on 2010 census data. And should some of those census tracts, the zones be rescinded? So of course, even though that may be just a few zones, everybody thinks, well, that might be my zone. So then they're afraid to actually put the shovel in the ground because they're concerned that the rug's going to be pulled out from under them. So certainty about that as well. And then of course, just as we've been talking about, information reporting, so that there's more focus on impact investing, transparency, accountability. Frankly, our clients are, while they realize that that's going to be some additional paperwork, everybody kind of appreciates, okay, this is a tax incentive, so taxpayers are underwriting this. It's only fair that we be able to measure the impact of the investments that are being made.
Mary,
back to you.
Mary, thank you so much. So I want to shift to what's actually happening on the ground. And, Robbie, I'll come to you. You've worked with pretty much opportunity zone stakeholders across the board, and you're probably one of the people most in tune with what's actually going on. And so can you share your insights on, what's actually working, what you're seeing working, and what are some of the barriers and challenges that you're seeing in the market to connect the capital to what we're describing as those high impact projects and those folks who are looking to get funding for their sort of community and economic development?
Absolutely. It's a loaded question, David. There are a lot of very good projects happening.
And I know you can handle it, so that's why I did it.
Thank you. There are a lot of very good projects happening in some of the traditional spaces, as Mary indicated, with real estate, but also in some places that are surprising even to me. One of the things that I like is seeing the expanded dialogue from the investment community with people with projects. So it's always been interesting to me that I know as a banker, there is a lot of money available and a lot of investors looking for projects. On the other hand, it is also an absolute fact that people with projects sometimes have trouble being married to those investors. So one of the things that the Opportunity Zones legislation has done has been to incentivize the investment community, whether it's equity providers, philanthropic organizations, anyone who has invested dollars for traditional reasons, for the public good or what have you. They're opening their eyes and looking at more projects. So we've seen, for example, in Houston, a very large national organization. It's Habitat for Humanity, the local chapter, local organization is doing a multi-use project, mixed income project, which will create jobs and check a lot of boxes. They're doing this with the support of Opportunity Zone funds, with the support of the city, and more importantly, with the support of a lot of philanthropic organizations. Within the Opportunity Zone fund space, we're seeing people who ordinarily, would not think of investing in a project or a business, taking advantage of the tax incentive to say, well, I'll put my money in a QOF, a Qualified Opportunity Fund, and look at projects in my backyard. And this is how, moving to smaller locations and rural communities, a lot of projects are being done. So a local business owner who has experienced a capital gain may look at a local university, hopefully an HBCU, and say, this school needs X. I have expertise in X. Let's collaborate with that university and help attract, say, a data center or improvements in agriculture or any of the things that the country needs now, especially now from a recovery standpoint, from a resiliency standpoint. I'm very happy to see dollars moving in those directions. From the other hand, the stakeholders, whether it's universities, local communities, not-for-profit organizations, I think are using their voices more to reach out to the investment community, both traditional and non-traditional, and say, in addition to investing directly in the project, maybe you could provide a letter of credit using your balance sheet to make us more bankable. Or maybe you would help create a job training center or fund a job training program at a local university. All of these things are needed for projects to be successful. The dollars are there, the need is there, the collaboration is what's necessary so that investors can make an attractive return. And again, I am a banker, but communities can be improved in the process.
No, thank you so much, Robbie. And so I just want to get to, you've highlighted it a little bit, but to zero in a little bit more. Keith and I are very bullish, as you know, on HBCUs and minority serving institution sort of being a local anchor that could facilitate or be that bridge that connects this group and these public-private partnerships that you're leading to. And I want to open it, Mary and also Emily, please join in. What is your assessment of this as a particular strategy and the wisdom of putting more effort, concerted thinking and coming up with a clear strategy to leverage these institutions? Mary, I'll start with you, and then maybe Emily, I'd love for you to jump in, and then Robbie, I know you do this day in and day out, so if you could round out the discussion.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely the right approach. One lesson that we've learned is that you cannot do Oz in a vacuum. It really literally takes a village or a community or a city or an educational institution to really take the bull by the horns and make this work. You need to identify what the needs are. You need to have the buy-in of local business leaders and financial institutions and the faith community and residents of the community. So it really requires, it's kind of a 360 approach. But once these needs are identified and once you have the stakeholders, the buy-in, and I would add to the role of the local government would be additional incentives. I don't think we've really touched on that, but I think we have quite a few on the call today that are from the government. So all of these other incentives that are available, Oz does not operate in a vacuum, and there's no prohibition against twinning the Oz incentive with any number of federal, state, local incentives. They can be job incentives, they can be any sort of incentives in order to maximize your capital stack. And I don't think we've also mentioned that President Trump has the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council, which is basically comprised of all the cabinet level agencies across the board. And their mission was to look across the federal government, look at all the available grants and loans and other types of incentives that might be available that could be paired with opportunity zones. And let's figure out a way to cut out the red tape. If you have different criteria for this program and OZ, let's try to streamline that so that OZ moves to the top of the list, and there's as much money going into these projects as possible. I think it was a really important council, and that can be replicated then on the state and local level to get as much money going toward these projects and businesses as possible. Once you have all of that, you still need a ringleader, someone that really is, has that vision and that commitment to make this work. And I see that where the HBCUs come in to actually be that focal point to make sure that whatever an idea is becomes a reality.
Emily, I don't know if you want to add your POV.
I don't know that there's a whole lot left to add. I think that Mary absolutely hit the nail on the head. I would agree firmly with everything that she covered and Robbie's points as well. There's the kind of partnerships and collaboration that A, we love to see, and that B, tends to have the best outcomes for everyone. So that's really exciting. I guess the only thing I will add is that I am 6 days short of the anniversary. So sorry to get everybody all excited. We've still got a week. My ability to measure time is gone.
I don't, Robbie, anything? I know this is your area that you want to add.
I would like to talk about very briefly a project to echo Mary's comments about work that has been done in the White House. The Economic Development Administration, the EDA under the Department of Commerce, just announced on yesterday a large grant investment in a center in Birmingham, Alabama, which is earmarked toward exploring and investigating racial and judicial injustices in the South, particularly in Alabama, but throughout the country. So in this one project, there's support from the city of Birmingham, there's EDA grant funding, there's private investment, and the project was really spearheaded by an individual, very wealthy individual with an interest in this area, which, as we know, is very important right now to the country. It's located within an opportunity zone. There's corporate support for it, and it will do all the things that we've discussed, create jobs. There are HBCUs located in Birmingham, which I think will have some student engagement with the project. The investors will earn a very nice return, and it helps tourism dollars as well. So everyone should benefit when it's done well.
Perfect. So I'd love to open it up now for some questions from the audience, as I promised. And I'll try to get to as many, so please keep the answers brief. The first question is, what's in store? This is from Robert Ford, and it's what's in store for opportunity zones under a Biden administration? Is the program expected to be continued, expanded, and embraced by the new administration? Mary, you want to take that one?
Sure. That's a really good question. I'm glad that you asked it, because there was a lot of concern about what would happen with the OZ incentive under a Biden administration and whether it would be repealed. But President-elect Biden made clear in his Build Back Better plan that he has no intention of rescinding the Opportunity Zone incentive. Would he like to tweak it? Yes, he would like to do things that actually are very consistent with what we're talking about today, about encouraging more impact investing and using public-private partnerships to be able to do that. He also supports increased reporting and accountability and transparency to, once again, to make sure that investments are going to the right places. One of the things real quickly that I think is important, another bullet in his plan would be that Treasury would need to approve, as I understand it, at least that Treasury would need to approve whether an opportunity fund was actually a qualified opportunity fund. Currently, opportunity funds self-certify that they meet the requirements. Again, putting on my bureaucrat hat, having anything run by Treasury, I think is going to be approved first before you can take a next step is not the right direction to go in. I think it's a good, the intentions are good, but I think that the reality of it is that if you have to submit a fund for approval to Treasury before you can go solicit investors, because the first question an investor is going to ask is, well, has Treasury approved this fund or not? It's going to slow things down and it's going to quash the use of the OZ incentive, and people are going to be investing their money elsewhere.
David, if I can add one thing.
Sure.
I would say that it's my understanding that the tenets of the Opportunity Zone legislation mirror in very large part some of the priorities of the Biden administration, especially as it relates to the economy, to economic recovery, to resilience, climate strategies, et cetera. So I do believe there will be very strong continued support for the use of opportunity zones in a very stable manner, which addresses some of the things which we've discussed on this call.
So I want to ask Emily the same question, but just to get Senator Scott's POV and working with the new administration on some of opportunity zones.
Yeah, so I mean, we've always worked really closely with our friends on the other side of the aisle to do anything with respect to opportunity zones generally. The original Investing in Opportunity Act had upwards of 95 bipartisan co-sponsors the year before it was passed into law. And of course, it's kind of had a bit of a different story in the media over the last year and a half, maybe. But again, I think this past year, we've really seen a shift back towards bipartisan support more broadly, namely this summer with the Biden campaign, including opportunity zones in what I would consider to be a very positive way in the Build Back Better plan, which was put out this summer. And Mary already highlighted the main points, but it absolutely showed support for the incentive in its raw form and supported concepts that have bipartisan support, like reporting, which we would also love to see get done. So we're, very excited to continue working with Democrats as we have been to try to get reporting done. We're going to always continue pushing to get that done. Frankly, it's kind of absurd that we haven't been able to get that done to this point. So hopefully this next Congress brings that about. Obviously, the lame duck remains a bit of a question mark. So we'll see what happens over these next few days. But yes, very excited to continue, encouraging and generating bipartisan support here on the Hill and more broadly.
Thank you. So the next question is from Stephanie Hayden, and it's, how does the pushing for these zones, which sometimes widely negatively affects certain areas, improve than just being, in my opinion, like another type of gentrification? And it's a similar spirit to the question. So it's really a question about the concern about these incentives spurring gentrification as opposed to actually benefiting residents. I don't know if Robbie, Mary, or anyone wants to take that one.
Well, the first thing I'll note is that upon designation, 96% of all opportunity zones, roughly 9,000 census tracts, showed no readily observable signs of gentrification, period. So that's fantastic, just knowing that the slate we started with, the governors on the whole did a really, really good job of selecting areas that were not, hopefully, as susceptible as other areas could be to that type of activity. Beyond that, what we've seen has been nothing short of really, really exciting for communities in terms of rebuilding in a positive and inclusive way. So again, I don't know that there is data that supports that. But again, the Reporting Act that Senator Scott introduced absolutely doesn't shy away from that potential or consideration in any way or form. There is no one singular indicator that can tell you whether a census tract is gentrifying or not. It's a litany of factors, right? So we look at everything from education levels over time to median family income to poverty rates to percentage of persons working that are residents of the zone to percentage of people that are working that are coming in from somewhere else to just a litany of economic indicators and socioeconomic indicators over time. And that can give us an idea of whether or not that census tract might be exhibiting signs of gentrification. I can tell you right now, the Impact Act that Senator Scott introduced, which is bipartisan again, calls for the most robust and in-depth study of what's happening in both opportunity zones as well as other low-income communities that were eligible to be designated as opportunity zones, but were not selected over time. So again, the reporting that Senator Scott's been pushing for absolutely does not shy away from that question, but we're very confident that the change that we're seeing is positive and inclusive and very much so community-centric.
Okay, I'll do one question, last question before we allow the panelists to do closing comments. And this one is from W. Hedgewood, and it's related around where any resources for finding opportunity zone best practices or data on what's going on in the opportunity zones that folks on the call can go to. Is there any particular resources you can point them to? If not, we will try to follow up with answer to that. Let me do one more.
I'll just say, I mean, for public resources like government resources, the White House Opportunity Zone Council has a website, HUD has an Opportunity Zones website, Senator Scott has an Opportunity Zone sort of, background portal online. I can't really talk about private options as much, but Mary or Robbie can highlight those.
Okay.
And
one last quick question. I'm sorry, go ahead, Mary, you had an answer?
I was just going to add to that on the Treasury, if you're looking for just where opportunity zones are located, the Treasury website has a complete list of the opportunity zones, and each state, is on board with this. So if you if you Google a state and opportunity zones, they all have their own opportunity zone resources. And I just, that's what I do every day. So, that's, feel free if you're interested in pursuing this to give me a call.
One last quick, I'm sorry, go ahead, Robbie.
The only thing that I would add is for investors and project sponsors to remember is that the investment itself has to make sense. So whatever resources, whatever due diligence someone would need to evaluate whether or not a grocery store or a cleaning store or an agricultural farm is a good investment does not change at all because of the inclusion in an opportunity zone. One thing that might change for the good is that there does tend to be more and more cities, state and local support, which can leverage the return on these investments. But at its core, the project itself has to make sense.
Okay, unfortunately, I have to cut this off. We're coming hours, and I would want to lose time for our list with very, very, very brief closing remarks. Emily, I'll start with you.
Sorry, I had to reach my unmute button, but no, I just wanted to say thank you again so much for having me on. This has been fantastic. I think specifically being able to really home in and focus on the relationship and the potential between HBCUs and this new incentive is a fantastic opportunity. So I'm excited about continuing this conversation and finding ways that we can continue to incentivize partnerships and uptake in that space. Again, I'm confident that we'll continue seeing really incredible stories emerging both throughout December and certainly hopefully into the next year. So looking forward to continuing working with everyone. And of course, we're always here to be a resource. So please don't hesitate to reach out. The last two things I'll say is that, for folks that are doing great work in opportunity zones, we absolutely implore you to let us know about it, be loud about it, be vocal about it. We want to highlight what you're doing. We want to know about it. And outside of that, reporting any assistance that we can get in terms of folks showing their support for reinstating reporting requirements and support for the Bipartisan Impact Act is always going to be helpful. So with that, thank you all again so much for having me on, and please always let me know if I can be helpful in any way.
Thank you. Robbie?
I'd like to thank everyone for joining. Again, Keith, thank you for pulling this together and enabling me to participate. I think it's been a very good session. And I will just briefly say, I will encourage everyone considering an opportunity zone project to continue to explore it, For all investors that are listening, please look at projects, lend your expertise, lend your experience, invest your dollars. And I also know that there are several students on the call, and I would like to encourage them to approach their universities, whether it's Alabama State or some of the schools in Virginia, and tell them you would like to get involved. You would like to play a role from a leadership standpoint, from a learning about investment standpoint. Truly, there are opportunities on all sides of the fence. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary?
And again, I would like to thank everybody for joining us today. And your head may be swimming if you don't have a good understanding of the OZ incentive and how it works. These pieces may not all fit, but I assure you that they do. And so don't let, if you're overwhelmed by what you heard today, tune in to additional webinars, because that's the point of these webinars, is to kind of be a continuing education to help you understand Oz and start to fit all the pieces into the proper slots. And don't let the complexity of it. Complexity is also opportunity, no pun intended. And Oz can just work for so many businesses and projects. So always consider opportunity zones as a part of your investment strategy and as you're developing a project or a business.
Well, thank you to this amazing panel. Thank you, Keith, for your leadership. What I can promise to the audience is this is the beginning, not the end. We're going to walk you through systematically through this journey over the next couple of webinars, so stay tuned. We're going to become more efficient about addressing all your questions and making sure we implore our panelists to help us get back answer to your questions. So thank you again for tuning in and for making our first webinar a success. Signing off.